Hey everybody, we are the Good Doctors of Abbey Research. You're very welcome to our YouTube channel. I am Dr. Erin.
I am Dr. Kristen.
We're here with a hot-ish take. It's more hot than ish because today we are talking about the New York Times Presents episode of their show called Framing Britney Spears. I think it was episode 6 of this season that is on FX and Hulu. And, if you were on the internets over the weekend, you might have seen a lot of hashtags about the Super Bowl, but you might have also seen interspersed with a lot of it, hashtag Free Britney, which I did. And I was like, I don't know what's happening, but it sounds like it's about Britney Spears. And then at the request of one of our lovely viewers, they asked us to take a look at this and unpack the whole, Grand Canyon worth of gender issues happening in the story of Britney Spears. This documentary, hour-long investigative report struck very similar nerves to us to Miss Americana, the documentary about Taylor Swift.
Which it's like Miss Americana meets season 4 of The Crown.
Yeah, it was a weird mashup, but we're here for it. And it's also sending us down other rabbit holes of all the documentaries about 90s personalities that we grew up with and judged heavily for their public perception and persona, including Britney Spears and Paris Hilton. So stay tuned.
Yeah, so let's start this by saying we're sorry, Britney, too.
Yeah, we're sorry. I'm sorry, Britney. Yeah, I mean, this hour-long investigation really covers the entirety of Britney's career, leading to very recent legal battles over the terms of her conservatorship, which is at this point 12 years ongoing permanent conservatorship where her father is in charge of her estate. He was at one time in charge of her person and her estate, and she has sort of slowly crawled back some autonomy, bless her. But it's a real deep dive that they get into in this piece. So we'll unpack a whole lot of it, but especially the idea of purity and purity culture and gender and what it's like to be a young woman in this public-facing position in America with the media culture that we have and the way that we perceive young women and their sexuality. Dr. Kristen, if you do not know this, is literally an expert in this, folks. You're very welcome. She has spent a long time researching and speaking to people about purity culture, evangelical religion, and the intersections thereof, and the way it shapes the way we see ourselves as women and girls. So I guess we'll start there, because that's pretty early on in the documentary. They start to get into the way the media shaped the narrative around who Britney Spears was. They go into her Star Search, which was adorable. I forgot she was on Star Search. I also forgot about Star Search.
I forgot about the Mickey Mouse Club. So
everyone was on the Mickey Mouse Club. So they go through that pretty quickly because she was on the Mickey Mouse Club for 2 years and then it dropped off and she went back home to Louisiana. And then a couple of years later, she got picked up by a record company. And that's when we get the creation of the Britney Spears brand that we know, and her amazingly rapid launch into stardom during a time when we were all really fixated on boy bands. So fair dues, Brit, for breaking into that market, although arguably she paid for it. So we're going to start with why we talk about Britney the way we talk about Britney, and why so many interviewers asked her about her virginity.
I think it was Wesley Morris in this documentary that brought up that as a culture, we were in the middle of the President Clinton sexually harassing his intern scandal. And so the media was like fervishly and creepily talking about sex in a way that it hadn't before. Mm-hmm. So there's that element of it. Let's say too, we think this documentary is really well done and really well put together. If you are looking to us for any sort of legal commentary, we want to tell you right now, you're not getting that. We don't really understand conservatorships.
Nope.
We'll be directing you to the incredible legal commentator, Emily D. Baker, who's a licensed attorney. And does legal commentary, and there'll be links to her channel below, specifically about the conservatorship. here on the YouTubes. She's our personal favorite legal commentator.
Yes, and we're so excited that she's going to explain conservatorships to everyone, because
not our world. And she practiced in California for a long time too. She was a district attorney in Los Angeles. So she gets some of this world in a way that we don't, but we get some of the culture in a way that she doesn't. And so that's why we're here talking about that today. So the cultural aspects of it is really what we're going to be diving into.
Mm-hmm.
The fact that she was born, so she's 2 years older than us. So like she was born in the early 80s in a small town in the buckle of the Bible Belt, in a time that was like before tabloid media in the way that it became, and came of age during the Perez Hilton of it all. There's some really specific elements around that as well. What I want to talk about, and Dr. Aaron led me into this, is our obsession with her virginity. So culturally, purity cultures, which is what we live in, by the way, we live in the United States is a culture that is preoccupied with the rights, opinions, and power of men. Men, white, especially white middle-class men, are the default in American culture. And anything that lies outside of that, white, able-bodied, cis-het men are the default. Anything that lays outside of that is other, anything. And in those kind of situations, the virginity of women is incredibly important, because they are in charge of raising children, and that is their primary goal. So in this kind of society, this is all subconscious, by the way, in this kind of society, we are most interested in women's ability to create the next generation and raise subsequent generations. We are not concerned about that with men, which is why we allow them to be rakes. We allow them to sleep around before they get married. We treat Justin Timberlake like he made this incredible conquest and he broke down the virgin and he's a victor for it. And we do all of that. But we prize a stranger's virginity very, very highly. So this is the same thing that happened with Princess Diana and Prince Charles. The fact that Diana was a virgin was very important to the royal family. We explore that in our Crown coverage, and we're not the only ones that do that, because she was physically going to be bearing the future of the country. Mm-hmm. As we don't have royalty in the United States,
we have celebs.
We decided that I think in some ways that Britney and Justin were royalty, because she was the princess that broke into the boy band world.
Yeah.
And he was the prince that won her. Mm-hmm. And we put a lot on her. This is also happening at a time where evangelical Christianity, in terms of a subculture, was at its most powerful. Mm-hmm. The True Love Waits movement was at its height. If you're unfamiliar with that, it was a merchandising movement that was asked teenagers to sign a pledge that they were pledging to God, to themselves, to their parents, to their future spouse, and their future children, that they would keep sexual activity until marriage. Only sleep with one person their whole lives. I signed the True Love Waits pledge. Almost everybody I knew at the time signed the True Love Waits pledge. We had little cards, we got rings. It was a whole thing. So all of this coming together, you have Britney being a good Southern girl, which means Christian and which means Baptist. Let's be honest. When you say a good Southern girl, you are coding that person as a Baptist who sings in the choir. You have the True Love Waits movement going nuts, and every evangelical news outlet is looking to give us, I'll say us, I was in this subculture, give us examples to look up to, of like, look, you don't have to have sex. You don't have to be, like, look at this person. And Britney was held up to us as a standard.
Yeah. And you have that at the time when the nation was obsessed with the sexual activity of the Democratic president. And at the time, the GOP had this moralizing platform. And so they were passing judgment on the sexual activity of the president and the woman that was involved in that. There was a lot of hate at her. There was a lot of hate at Hillary Clinton for not being a good enough wife. So a lot of the judgment fell on the women in that scenario. And so that was happening all at the same time. So you had examples of how not to behave. And Britney was put up as an example of how to behave.
But because she's a human being and not a brand, she never quite behaved the way that we needed her to behave. She wasn't Diana. She didn't have an entire system behind her crafting perfection in the way that we now know Diana had.
And we also know that sex sells, and we hypersexualized young girls all the time in our country. So she was in this weird dichotomy where she was expected to act innocent and virginal while also being dressed as,
as one of the highest hits on Pornhub.
Yeah. Yeah. So like she was put in a really untenable position when she was 16.
And she was developmentally underprepared.
Like Diana.
For kind of everything. So all of this is happening. We were definitely told as teenage girls to judge her. We were, all of the media we consumed, 17 Magazine, Tiger Beat, they all wanted us to side with Justin when they broke up. Britney cheated on him with a backup dancer, Wade Robson, who is actually very famously one of Michael Jackson's accusers and Wade Robson is a very prominent choreographer and dancer still in Hollywood.
Yeah.
That's never been confirmed. There are no receipts on that. Who knows? So from, let's say, when were we 15? 1998 to 2008. Let's take those 10 years really quickly.
Yeah.
We have incredible shifts in culture in the United States. We have a lot of weird conversations around women's bodies. None of them are done well. We also have the emergence of the internet. We have the emergence of a tabloid culture that is both in papers and on the internet, which at the time doubled the money that people could get for their pictures because of digital rights. And you have the fact that none of the other teen pop princesses, they called them that, quite grasped the country in the way that they did, in the way that Britney did. And I think some of that is because Britney was always trying to be herself. But at the same time was so fundamentally lonely, she didn't know who to be herself with. Which is what we get a little bit from Taylor Swift and Miss Americana, which is why we referenced her, that Britney realized early on there was absolutely no way to make anybody happy. It took Taylor a little bit longer to realize that, and Taylor goes into that, and our coverage of Miss Americana explores that a lot. But I think really what happened with Brit is that we all told her who we wanted her to be.
Yeah.
And then she was that, and it wasn't good enough. So we kept changing it on her without remembering she was a human being. And because her virginity was our public property, we had a right to say what was over her body. So we thought. And really all this girl was doing was singing songs.
Like singing songs and dancing. And, we started out this video apologizing to Britney. And, we meant that in all sincerity, because watching this back was painful on several levels, because it was painful to watch a human being in crisis.
Yep.
And painful to see what our society and our media culture does to these human beings who are talented enough to entertain us.
Yep.
And I just we're going back and forth in our chats while we were watching this. And I was like, we just set this girl on fire. Because she didn't live up to the unlivable expectations we set. But I judged her. And especially during her mental health crisis in 2008, 2009, when you watch it in this documentary, I don't see how she doesn't end up there with the life that she had. I would have shaved my head and gone for a paparazzi's window with an umbrella too.
I would have gone with more than an umbrella. So I'm actually pretty proud of her.
I would have done the same thing.
I just kept thinking, how did we ever let this be legal? How did we ever let people sit outside people's houses like this? How did we let them go into stores? I mean, I'm sure we still do. I made a decision a while ago as just as for my personal ethic to not consume any unposed paparazzi shots of any of the celebrities that I enjoy the work of. So this could all still be happening. The most I see is every once in a while a picture of like Sebastian Stan walking around New York City will come across my dash, but I don't consume this.
Yeah.
I subscribed to Perez Hilton. I check that website every morning.
I would go on People.
Yep. Oh my God. People magazine. I had a literal subscription to People. I'm pretty sure I bought a lot of Us Weeklies. Yeah. And like there's stories of that time, like of the day that one of her meltdowns, the People magazine office bought champagne for everybody because they made so much money.
Yeah.
I mean,
like, and there's a couple really horrible interviews that Britney had the misfortune of participating in during this time. The Diane Sawyer one is pretty downright horrible. And if you want a microcosm of how poorly we treat young women and girls, particularly on this issue of purity and sex and their bodies, you can just watch the clip from that where Diane tells her.
Yeah, go ahead.
Diane tells her like all the things that Justin said, and instead of saying, "How do you feel? What do you think happened? Do you want to talk about this?" she says, "What did you do?" And I was like, oh, so there it is. There it is. Always the girl's fault. But before you make your point, I just wanted to hit the Matt Lauer one was one of the painful ones as well, because he said to her, "What do you think you have to do to get the paparazzi to leave you alone?" And she said, I don't know. I don't know what I could do. And he said, "Is that your greatest wish?" And she starts crying and saying yes. And like, how do we look at that and go, yes, we should take more from her?
I think that's because the point I was going to make is that we are different now.
Yes.
If Diane Sawyer did that interview right now, she'd be fired.
Oh, yeah.
We would rake her over the coals. And we are. I mean, if you would like to, a lot of people are calling for Diane Sawyer to publicly apologize now to Britney Spears. And we would add our voices to that.
Yes.
We know more now, and that we know more now.
We know more now. We can do better. Yeah.
We can do better. And how we speak to humans about their lives is a way that we can do better.
Mm-hmm.
I kept going back to the oft quoted now Michael Hobbs quote on here that fame is a human rights violation.
Uh-huh.
Because what I felt was we watched an hour and a half of a human rights violation. And her autonomy was never anyone's priority. Her personhood was never anyone's priority. And Wesley Morris says, who is the kind of the critic, he's a critic at large at the New York Times, and he is kind of the social critic at large in this documentary. And he says there was too much money to be made off her misery.
Yeah, he said at no point during her mental health crisis did we have a conversation about her mental health. And he said there was literally too much money to be made from her suffering.
Yep. You see that in this documentary in the way that the Us Weekly guy is trying real hard not to take any culpability. You can see it in the confusion of the paparazzi. Although I've listened to some other podcasts with people who have been following this story a lot longer than Dr. Aaron and I, who say that one of the interesting things about Britney is that she never had a comfortable relationship with the paparazzi, because there were times, like she dated one for a while.
Yeah.
And we don't know.
Mm-hmm.
And so it was awkward always for her. I was just constantly struck again, and I said this about Diana. Woman needed some girlfriends. I don't know how you get it when you become so famous at 15 that immediately everybody around you was a sycophant or needing something from you.
Yeah.
I'm so sad for Britney that they fired that lovely woman,
Felicia,
who very clearly loves her and could probably be a very good person for her in her life right now.
I know.
But one of the things this documentary drove home to me, first of all, that the entire media culture and all of us who consume it and participate in it, including ourselves, hi, we're part of the media culture since we're here on YouTube.
Hi.
We're all culpable in this.
Yes.
But also the incredible importance of community.
Yeah.
The incredible importance of having people around you who you trust. The people who will remind you who you are when you've forgotten.
Yeah.
And we're going to get into the conservatorship and some of the Free Britney of it all in a minute, but I am worried that she still doesn't have those people.
Yeah. Yeah.
And for somebody who has given us so much of herself, I mean, her songs are a bop, y'all. And she has worked her tail off in this conservatorship, whether that was consensual or not.
So much work.
For someone who has given so much to us, I would hope as a general public, my deep hope back for her is that she has people.
Yeah. And I mean, you get that sense of loneliness so much, and
like it's visceral a few times,
and not knowing who you can trust. And like, why would you ever think you could trust people? And then she goes through this like series of very toxic relationships where people are clearly taking advantage of her vulnerability emotionally, leading up to arguably her father taking conservatorship, who, as this documentary points out, was not present in her life until 12 years ago when he stepped in during her mental health crisis and said, I should have control of everything.
And the people that they interview in this documentary, no one had anything positive to say about him, no matter at what point in Britney's life they met him. And we here on this channel are skeptical of him at the most generous.
Yeah, so I think for me, the thing that was, most interesting about the second half of this investigative report was the Free Britney movement.
Yes.
That comes up. We'll link to a Vanity Fair article that was published like 6 days after the presidential election, so it missed my radar for reasons, but it's very, very good, and goes into a lot of detail about this. But I think it was around 12 years ago that the conservatorship started to happen and become a big deal. But by 2010, 2011, we get some fans that are using this call for action to free Britney, and they start examining her Instagram posts. There's these two phenomenal ladies who start a podcast that starts out as a joke, looking at Britney's Instagram, and they start to believe that they find evidence in her Instagram that something is afoot. So I'm fascinated by like internet and hashtag movements, that like Free Britney has become this big thing off of some Facebook posts and Instagram posts, in a very different but kind of similar way to Black Lives Matter, which also started as a Facebook post and a hashtag. And for me personally, fascinated by this intersection of conspiracy theories and internet activism that is uniquely 2020 in this country. We saw a huge spike in QAnon interest and online activity during the first lockdown of the pandemic. I see no accident that we also saw a huge spike in interest in the Free Britney movement, not just because there was also legal stuff happening all throughout last year as well, so drawing more media attention to it. And the Vanity Fair article does a really great job of drawing some of those corollaries, which I find absolutely fascinating. But it talks specifically about this idea that we like to solve puzzles as human beings. We like to find solutions for things. And especially at the start of the pandemic, when everything seemed up in the air and we had no idea what was going to happen and we had no control, we as humans are primed to seek out things where we can find answers. So you get the rise of QAnon, you get the rise of Free Britney. And the quote was, it sounds like part of the appeal of Free Britney is that followers can likewise to QAnon, imagine themselves as fans doing their part to rescue Spears as if she's a modern day Rapunzel trapped in a tower by evil forces and desperate for a champion. And that's from Joe Pierre, who's a clinical psychiatric professor at UCLA. So I think like aside from Britney's really a person in trauma, and we should all be apologizing and trying to help her, that for me was like the fascinating adjunct of the end of this was the dramatic rise in support for her online and the activists who showed up during a pandemic outside the Los Angeles County Courthouse with coordinated matching Free Britney masks. I mean, the dedication live blogging going in, but like honestly being advocates for her in a lot of ways.
Advocates. Yep.
And, you know, the documentary really does an interesting job of talking about how, you know, none of us really know Britney Spears. We think that we know her. And Dr. Kristen can talk to you a lot about parasocial relationships if you're interested, and how we think we know celebrities because we see so much of them and we identify with them and we find emotional bonds with them, we form them. But we don't really know. But she did, in a court document, publicly acknowledge the informed support of her fans as a very pretty evident hat tip that they're on the right track as long as they're informed and that she's okay with it. She has not sued. She has not, you know, taken legal action against what her fans are doing in ways to protect her image or her brand. So that can seem like, you know, implicit consent that she's okay with what they're doing. We honestly have no idea what kind of legal control she has over anything. But yeah, I think that strange parallels, I had made them in my head while watching it, and thankfully this article does a much better job of bringing out why we're so interested in other humans and conspiracy theories.
Yeah, I mean, I think since the Boston Marathon bombing, we've been having some conversations about like armchair detectives in a different way. I mean, very famously, if you aren't aware, Reddit thought they identified the Boston bombing suspect. They were entirely wrong and inadvertently ruined someone's life entirely. I believe that person even harmed themselves because of the Reddit activity. And then at the other end of the spectrum, you have the hunt for the Golden State Killer being largely led by the late Michelle McNamara, who was an armchair detective in a way.
Yeah, and even recently, like there's a whole subsect of academia that helps identify people on the internet. So a lot of people involved in the January 6th events at the Capitol, there's been a whole like collectivization of people on social media to try and identify them, especially if they're, you know, under warrant from the FBI. And so there's a lot we can do with social media platforms now, for good and for ill.
And that level of participation in the lives of other people via not leaving our homes, which is how we have been forced to interact with the lives of other people, I think is only going to get more interesting and stronger. Mm-hmm. I am convinced that this is one of the reasons that stuff like the NXIVM documentary took off. We've all talked about how none of us would know who Joe Exotic was if it wasn't the pandemic.
Tiger would have been a flop.
There's lots and lots of elements of this. Our main takeaways from this documentary are that Britney's story is uniquely American in the particular soup that she swam in at the time. Our deep hope for her is that she finds balance and control both over her own life and her own brain. And that it sounds like from every interview she's done, she desperately wants is time with her kids. And so I hope she's getting that. And I hope she's found a way to be a mom, which is what we see a couple interviews that's her deep, deep wish. And if she ever chooses to grace us with her presence again, we're buying tickets.
Oh, we are going to that show. 100%. There is zero part of me that wants to go to Las Vegas for anything, but I would go for two humans currently, Britney Spears and Taylor Swift.
Yeah.
If they were in Vegas and that was the place that I could see them. But yeah, I mean, I think we've seen a lot of people talking about various angles of this story. And you know, it's pretty hot. This episode dropped over the weekend, so we'll see if anybody else does the gender deep dive that we just did. But we're unique to have Dr. Kristen's expertise in this, and that we have these conversations a lot on our YouTube channel. But I think
not everybody talks about public virginity. That's not a topic that everyone else wants to talk about.
Nobody wants to talk about how we shame young women for
we commoditize strangers' wombs. No, that's not something else everybody talks about. Okay, noted.
Oh, it's just us. Okay, cool. We're special.
Hashtag weirdos. Yep.
Special little feminist flowers here. So, you know, if we can be those advocates and those voices saying the way we treat young women and girls, across all intersections of ability and race and ethnicity and gender identity is pretty freaking horrible, and we can do better. And that's what we've, learned from this sad tale of what we did to Britney Spears.
If this is your first time with us, we hope you enjoyed it. We'd love to know your thoughts below. If you've got other resources that you think that we should know, we're obviously research nerds. We both have PhDs in social science, hence the doctor. And we're particularly invested in making sure we've got receipts for what we say. So please give us more ideas if you've got it. Also, if you're new here, feel free to do the YouTube-y things and like and subscribe, and set that little bell next to subscribe to make sure that you get all of our content. If there's other documentaries that you'd like us to cover, other cases, like we said, we're going to probably take a look at Paris Hilton's self-directed documentary next, and kind of see that. But we're open to talking about a lot of different things. We love knowing what is best for you guys. Ariel, we hope you enjoyed this. And everyone else who potentially was looking at our channel and asking us to cover this and didn't text at 1 o'clock in the morning and ask for it. Anyway, that's it. That's us, the Good Doctors, for now. We will see you next time with a hot-ish take.
Take care, everybody.